What's up, and welcome back to Nowstalgia Pod, another rankings episode coming at you. Pat Sheehan, of course, joined by Dave Martin Swagger. Dave, we're talking J. Cole today. How you feeling?
Feeling good. New album, The Fall Off. Wait, no, The Off Season. The Off Season.
The off
New
season.
album coming out end of this week. So, what better time to discuss J. Cole's previous five studio albums? A lot to get through. He's had a long career already.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think when you think of J. Cole, right, and like you said, he's had a long career. You think he has a lot of music out. Obviously has been tapped as like the next coming in the rap world for quite a while. But really, we're only ranking five albums today, and I think that's a testament to a different time. Him coming up in a different time when mixtapes were a little bit more regarded as like real projects, as like a
Hmm.
predecessor to like that first album. Whereas now, Chance the Rapper puts out an album, and then 2 years later, it's like, oh no, actually, that's not an
Yeah.
album. Even though it went platinum and charted and everybody loved it. No, now I'm releasing my first album, The Big Day. So it's a little. He comes from a different time to today's rap
Mhm.
standards, but those first mixtapes really, brought him on the scene.
Yeah. And they're actual mixtapes in the sense that you cannot listen to them on streaming services. You'd have to find them on YouTube or SoundCloud, or if you got lucky, download them off DatPiff back in the day. They are very much that's just how mixtapes used to be.
Hmm.
And nowadays, it makes no sense to put out music that's not available on all the streaming services for monetization purposes. So, yeah, J. Cole, he had those first three tapes from what was it, oh 07 to oh 09, the come up,
Hmm.
the warm up, and Friday Night Lights. Friday Night Lights was 2010.
Hmm.
And by the time that second tape rolled around, he had become the first artist signed to Rock Nation by Jay Z. Definitely a big deal, obviously considering how many artists Rock Nation has continued to sign and manage since then, but also just the expectations that are levied on a guy. J. Cole is from North Carolina, but especially in those early days, he was definitely repping Queens, and you can understand how Jay Z kind of took a liking to him. And I think a lot of people forget this, but J. Cole's featured on the Blueprint 3, the Jay Z
Yeah,
second comeback album, right? It's
yeah,
not the best feature song. Was it Mr. Nice Watch? No, A Star Is Born.
yeah. A
Star Is
Star is
Born.
Born.
Yeah. And it's a whatever song, but it's like kind of funny to think about that because like J. Cole from 2009 this feels so far away at this point.
Yeah, it's crazy. He's featured on that the Blueprint 3, on that A Star Is Born song, which feels a bit like an anointing. Then
Mm,
he's XXL freshman just the next year, 2010,
right.
and then what? The next year is when the first album comes out, Cold World,
Yeah.
Sideline Story. I mean,
2011, correct.
and like you said, he had Friday Night Lights also drop in 2010. A very popular mixtape. I think some of our friends still ride for that album, and I think certainly it was something that we were listening to in college quite a bit.
Yeah, it's on the short list of albums that have not been put on streaming yet that are like there's a strong appetite for that to happen. There's no doubt
Mhm.
about that. And um as far as like the big songs on it, I actually gravitate towards the other two mixtapes just because like on the warm up Lights Please ends up being placed on uh Cold World, the album,
Yep.
and like the Simba series earlier on. It's like I know people really love Friday Night Lights and like hold it up as like some people it's his best work ever, and it's like I don't know if it's like that great, but it definitely like is a nice hallmark of early Cole, and I would say better than the first album, Cold World, which
Hmm.
came with some commercial concessions because again we're operating at a different time when you're part of the label system, and being a commercial, putting out a commercial album had different expectations and requirements for success than a mixtape did. Now again it's all the same, but it's kind of funny to look back on him like compromising, certain sense, not even like did anything too crazy, but like he compromised his sound a little bit for that debut major label album,
Yeah.
Versus the mixtapes, which were the last two were still on the rock, but like those mixtapes seem more in line of what he was like at that time. It's kind of funny to think about.
Yeah, it's interesting too because as you listen to like the rest of his discography, I think second album, Born Sinner, is a little bit still in that lane of like he's trying to find a hit. He's trying to really like get that radio attention pretty much from what Forest Hills on. J.
Mhm.
Cole is like, this is who I am as an artist, and really seems to find what he feels comfortable in, the stories he wants to talk about and tell. Um, and it really does stand out as just like an album that feels like like the producers and obviously the record company had their fingerprints all over it, probably pressuring him a little bit more. And he had a lot of pressure on him. I mean, being called the next Nas uh, from a pretty young age and a young time in his career, it's a lot of pressure. And I think the comparisons are, it makes sense why people would put them together. Great storytellers, bar for bar, potentially the best like lyricist in the rap game. Um, I don't know if he's Nas. I think he's J. Cole. But I
Yeah,
think
no
I think
question.
the DNA is definitely similar. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I get it. Um, I always thought the lyricism of the early stuff was a little overrated, and that was kind of the genesis of J. Cole stands being an annoying force on the internet. People really love J. Cole, especially the early stuff.
Went
He's had
platinum, no
many,
features, bro.
and we're talking years before that,
Yeah.
you know. And and I like J. Cole plenty too, but it was always kind of annoying to see like these people always trying to anoint him and say, he's the best one, and it's like you look at the body of work, and there's a lot of highlights here too, but it's like lyrically he's good, and maybe it's just because most there's really no other rapper of his stature attempting to make this kind of music outside of Kendrick. And
Mhm.
once Cole had ascended to this, he had few peers, I guess, in that regard. But the early days when he was not anywhere close to the top, I don't know how special it was. Of course, all the Cole stands would really, really disagree.
Yeah, no, I think when it's actually funny because on Born Sinners, when he has the song Let Nas Down, but what Forest Hills is really when I think you start to see that Nas DNA, where that whole album, which I think we'll, go into a little bit more in a second, is really when he, I think, finds who he wants to be, how he wants to be approaching making albums, and it's so cohesive and it all makes so much sense, and the storytelling on it is so much more in depth than even things that you got on Born Sinner. It just feels like if at that point people were making that comparison, it would make sense. But I think up to that point, it wasn't really an earned uh, comparison. But again, I think people are always kind of looking for that. Who's the next whatever? And
Yeah.
Nas seemed to be the lane he was in.
I mean, then eventually, probably by the time in between Born Center and 2014, I guess, around that time, it just came conventional wisdom that Drake, Kendrick, and Cole, that's your top right now in terms of
Mhm.
the rappers that had come of age around the turn of the decade and ascended towards the top, putting to the side all like the legacy people like Jay-Z, Kanye, Eminem, Lil Wayne, all that. You had Drake, Cole, and Kendrick all doing slightly different things and all finding great success. And I think Cole is actually, funny enough, he's the least commercial of the group. You'd be surprised to look, but like Kendrick really dominated with those album sales towards the end there. And it's
Mhm.
funny because I remember like you watch all these like videos with like athletes and stuff, and it's like Drake, Kendrick, Cole, gotta cut one. Who you cutting? And I feel like they always say Kendrick, but yet Kendrick has a lot of commercials like credits at the end of
Yeah,
the day. Like he is still a very popular artist, and it's always kind of funny because I always thought like they used to put Cole as Cole's in between Kendrick and Drake, right? He's like he's still very very lyrical, but also has commercial appeal too. And it's like no, they really all have commercial appeal.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I mean, I still view Cole that way at towards the top. I feel like there hasn't been like an Atlanta artist or a West Coast artist to truly get to that level. You have people at like the next step down, right? Like Tyler and Chance for a while and Thug or something. But like I feel like Cole has just really just been at that top perch for years at this point, and we'll see how the off season does commercially, but he's just kind of certified made man at this point.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy because even talking about the commercialness of it all. I mean, every album he's put out has gone number one on the U.S. charts,
Yeah.
and even as far back as Forest Hills, he was starting to go like top 10 internationally, and now every album he puts out, even for Your Eyez Only, which is I'll say is in the back half of
Mhm.
the five for me. That went number one abroad as well in
That was his
Canada.
biggest first week in the states
Crazy.
by a wide margin, almost 500,000. Um, and Born Sinner, I think, is actually important to note because that did not go number one its first week. That was obviously a very important, influential day, coming out the same day as Kanye West Yeezus and Macklemore Watching Movies. But Born Sinner, a few weeks later, took the number one spot from Kanye, funny enough. And, but yeah, I mean, you have to figure like the off season it's going to do well. The lead track Interlude was streamed heavily despite literally being named Interlude. Like
Yeah,
there's so much attention on J Cole still at he's approaching his late 30s.
he's a he's definitely, I think, settled in as like, I don't know if we can call him an elder statesman, but it just kind
Hmm.
of he has this very specific lane that I don't even know if a lot of rappers even try to really imitate. Like he really is kind of just seen as that like storyteller, at least in my book, who just like probably has some of the best bars in the game, and he's an introspective guy. He tries to, tell the stories of other people on his records. It's interesting because you mentioned Kanye before, and I think one of the criticisms is that um, Kanye hasn't really been introspective until maybe some of the stuff we heard on Kids See Ghosts
Hmm.
since My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. Like it's
Hmm.
it's been a while, but J. Cole almost is like introspective, I think, sometimes to a fault, where like
Yeah.
he's trying to like get so deep with things that the music can feel really bogged down and heavy, and the verses can just be a little bit like too weighty in a sense to really become commercial. But I give him credit because like we were saying before, no one else is really doing the things he's doing.
Yeah. Especially at, again, this scale, just how
Right.
popular he really is.
So why don't we jump in, album by album? We already kind of touched on Cold World, the sideline, but like we said, it's a 2011 release, a lot of hype leading up to this, but kind of hit or miss for me. I would say there are a couple of tracks that I think are pretty good. Like you mentioned, "Lights Please" off the mixtape. Obviously, I think that song's a great jam. Um, but for me, like hearing something like Workout, where you're basically taking like a Kanye thing and like just
Hmm.
putting J. Cole over it, I really enjoyed that. Dollar in a Dream, I
Yep.
mean, I thought that was really good, and then like switching it up 2/3 of the way through was a standout for me. What other track stood out to you?
Yeah, I mean it's funny because like this is the second collab with Jay Z, Mr. Nice Watch. You get the first J Cole Drake collab in the morning. Songs are fine; they're okay. But Workout, I mean, Workout was the big hit off this, big radio hit. I think it's the first J. Cole song I heard. I really can't remember exactly what it was. I was not up on the tapes beforehand when they were coming out. But Workout laid a blueprint for him on the next album. But that's probably the best like takeaway from this. But this album was pretty panned, honestly. Like
Mhm.
especially because it's not delivering on the hype. And for people that were already really up on J. Cole, they clearly saw it as lesser than the mixtapes. Um, I think my favorite song on this, Workout Aside, would be the title track "Cold World." I really like that hook. I think that's really catchy, and listen back again, it still sounds really good. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, this is like as far as like debuts go, it's pretty unremarkable.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I think as I was listening through, I think you can start to see pieces of things that he's going to take and really like build on. But we kind of mentioned how I think the pressure of making an album that was going to get a lot of radio play, that was going to sell a lot right away, and kind of uh, validate all the praise he was getting as a up and coming rapper was just too much for this to come out and be what he wanted it to be. But he took a year off, comes back in 2013 with Born Sinner, which I think is a much better effort. Um, I think you start to see him being a little bit more introspective on this album. I think you still see him trying to make that like really catchy song, but I think you also see him making some more like choice collaborations, which I think really lift some of the best moments on Born Sinner. Did you enjoy checking out Born Sinner again, listening back to it?
Yeah, I did. I did. I Born Sinner's funny because that's like an album that has a lot of fans online still to this day. And when people talk about J. Cole, like people be like, "Nah, Born Sinner, that's the one." And I do have to agree. I think it still holds up really well, and was such a step forward for J. Cole just in terms of making a project only 2 years later, and just a fun time, of course. Again, coming out alongside Mac Miller taking several creative steps forward, and of course Kanye going completely into left field and nailing it in the process. It's a very exciting time to see those three artists all really make changes to themselves at the same time. But yeah, so Born Sinner, you have Power Trip with Miguel, which
Yeah,
is the success, the sequel to Workout for all intents and purposes. Another huge radio hit, another really popular song. It's effective. It's really well done. And believe that was my first experience with Miguel. Um, but I mean, there's so many cuts on Born Center. I think it's a rewarding one. It's funny. You go on Spotify now, you'll see it just packaged with all those bonus tracks, which I remember you had to like go find at the time.
yeah.
Songs like Near Times with 50 Cent. I quite enjoy. Dudes Know, the second to last one on the track, interpolating Notorious Thugs by Biggie just off the cuff as a bonus track,
Yep.
right? Meanwhile, The Sinner itself is a Biggie nod, of course, to lyrics from Juicy. So this definitely is the first J. Cole album to me, including the mixtapes, that rewards repeat listening just because I think there's a lot of like really good keepers on it.
I agree, and I think even the title track is pretty great. I really enjoy the like uh, the track "Let Nas Down," which I mentioned before, which comes right
Mhm.
before it as well. I think that those are probably like my favorite back to back. But even like "Crooked Smile," like that run of three songs with TLC, just a really choice collaboration that I think really lifts Cole. And it's funny because you mentioned like the 50 Cent song, and I mean obviously 50 Cent, especially at that point, it's starting to come down off his fame, but still a really high profile feature for Cole. Probably the most high profile feature he has on this is Kendrick, and I kind of think that Forbidden Fruit song falls a little flat for me.
Yeah, no,
I looked through it, I'm like, how is that the one that fell flat out of all of these? I don't know.
and it's funny because there's been the rumored Kendrick J. Cole collab album
Right.
for years and years at this point. There's very little fruit of their creative friendship, at this point. And funny enough, you get Forbidden Fruit, and it's like, it's whatever as a song,
Yeah.
honestly. But I mean, Crooked Smile. If you want to use TLC, still, please go ahead. It definitely elevates the song there. And Let Nas Down. Obviously, that song sounds great, and it got the Nas remix himself, where Nas was like, "No, you didn't let Nas down. You let Nas proud." That was a huge moment. That of course, you have to find that on YouTube. That song, but that really blew my mind when I first heard that. But in general, that the whole premise of not Cole making Let Nas down is really inward looking about what happened with Cole World the Silence, or why that album did not meet expectations, what he did. And you can tell, Born Sinner, he's evolving as an artist, but he's also not making those concessions anymore. And getting the Nas like remix to it, just super fun.
Definitely, I agree. So Born Sinner, you start to see Nas, I think, really coming into his own, achieving the
Nas coming into
acclaim.
his own.
Nas, geez, yeah, wow, what a slip
That'd
up
be
there for me.
impressive.
Yeah, J. Cole coming into his own, really living up to the hype that had been placed on him.
Mhm.
And then obviously the next year we get 2014 Forest Hills Drive, which I think is what everybody points to as the album that really solidified Nas. Jeez, I'm stuck. Cole as the artist that he is now, and really elevated him to like that upper echelon because the for all the memes about it, this is an album that does go platinum. There's no features. This is just Cole reflecting on his time growing up in Fayetteville, North Carolina. You're talking about some of the experiences he went through. Whether it's uh, Wet Dreams, which touches on a very specific experience that he
Mhm.
had growing up,
Yeah.
or I think some of the more pointed ones, um, like like Love Yours or No Role Models, things like that, where he's
Yeah.
reflecting a little bit more about like some of those inner struggles. Um, Definitely a good album. Do you think this? Uh, do you think this really is as good of an album as people kind of hold it up to be?
Yeah. So it's his biggest best selling album at the time. Came with a lot of hype. I remember vividly when it came out. It was a few weeks before Christmas 2014. So you're a good like year and a half after Born Sinner. And I really do vividly remember listening to this a lot. And I don't think it's a classic. J. Cole does not have a classic album. There's a lot of people that call this album a classic. I think those people throw the word out a little too much. Um, but I think it's a great album, and it has duds on it. We can get to those in a second. But it's funny to look at this one too, because this is another point where like there is contention between J. Cole fans, hardcore fans, and more casual observers and critics over this album. The fans adore the shit out of this album. And then the other people are like, yeah, that was pretty good again, but like there's kind of a disconnect there. But I think the highs on 2014 Forest Hills Drive still really land. At the end of the day, this is the album with the most bangers he's ever made,
Mhm.
and those bangers still hit. Seen a lot of these songs live, they're great. So yeah, I still really love it.
What would you say are those songs that are like the highs of this album for you?
Well, you mentioned No Role Models. No Role Models was a
Yeah.
highlight, 7 years ago, 6.5 years ago. It's approaching a billion streams on Spotify now. Holy shit. Like I did not
Mhm.
expect that. Wet Dreams, 580 million. Like, but no role models, from the jump, Martin Luther King would have been on Dreamville. It's like such a boast. And yet you kind of believe it the way Cole, he's so confident in the way the song works and stuff. Like
Mhm.
it's a great track. And the call and response of like the one time for my LA sisters, one time for my LA hoes. It works every single time when he
Yep.
performs the song. It's tremendous, really. And then I mean, Wet Dreams. I love Wet Dreams. Some people think it's a little cheesy, but the way he's like, only Cole could rap
It,
about
yeah.
losing his virginity
It's a very J.
to
Cole song.
his girlfriend in that way. And they get the video, it's all puppies and stuff. He's like, I think you nailed that. Later on in For Your Eyes Only, he kind of tried to do this again and fold and close. Doesn't work nearly as much. But I think Wet Dreams is effective. Because like at the end of the day, the song still sounds good.
Yeah.
Like if you can get by the cheesiness. But then you also have Get Off My Dick, A Tale of Two Cities, Fire Squad. You just got bangers and bangers on this. I think it starts off pretty strong with January 28th as well. Love Yours. He likes to perform that a lot, in the
Mhm.
slow parts of a set these days. I think that one's effective. The dud, though, for me, which became a hit, funny enough, is Apparently. Do not like
Mm.
Apparently at all, but it was a successful song nonetheless.
Yeah, and I think that kind of speaks to it, why this album is held up. Because even listening through, like, I think certainly there were tracks that stood out more, and you mentioned a lot of them. But I don't think there's really like a bad track, and the fact that even the tracks that we think are maybe not hitting as much are still doing numbers just speaks to I think how Cole really found his footing here, and
Yeah.
just this is when he elevates his game. Um, yeah, 2014 Forest Hills. Not sure if I would call it a classic either, but I think if you're going through and picking one album from J. Cole that you say might be on that level, it's definitely this one. Um, and then you mentioned, he kind of follows up 2 years later, exactly 2 years later. Forest Hills comes out December 9th, 2014. And then For Your Eyes Only, December 9th, 2016. Dave,
We
I think we actually talked about this one.
we
First
did
one.
the audio only days. Go find that. SoundCloud.com/nostalgia pod. Yes, the first J. Cole album we discussed.
I don't think we liked it very much.
We did not. Again, hotly anticipated coming off 2014, which was so rapturously received by his biggest fans. This did almost 500,000 first week. As we said, J. Cole at this time was a very well established top tier rapper.
Mhm.
And yet, this is a huge disappointment. It has to be a huge disappointment to everyone. There are defenders of the album. I don't think it's garbage or anything, but it's just such a letdown, such a come down off 2014. 2014 again has all those hits, all those bangers. Even if you don't think it's like a 10 out of 10, has so many great moments. For Your
Mhm.
Eyes Only is where you first get late period old head Cole rearing its ugly head a little bit, where like his new worst tendencies start to present themselves, namely not want to say being darker, but being like mopier and just less fun to be around. In this case, listen to.
Yeah.
Um, and also he does a little more singing, which is just not effective. He's not Drake when it comes to singing. Definitely less is more.
Mhm.
Um, and it's just a moment with album with few highlights. I think there's one tremendous track on For Your Eyes Only, but overall, it's a really forgettable album. And again, came with such disappointment when it came out.
Yeah, listening back through this and um, remembering when we talked about it, I think I just found this to be like a bit of a slog. And you kind of mentioned, you get it's a little darker. It's not as exciting. It's almost kind of like uh, this is when Cole, like I mentioned at the beginning, sometimes he can be his own worst enemy in terms of his conceptualization of things. He
Mhm.
obviously was going for something here where he was kind of putting himself in the role of a drug dealer from where he was growing up, from Fayetteville growing up, and
Mhm.
trying to like tell stories and create a sense of worldliness and understanding for someone who might be in the position to be a drug dealer. But it's it just doesn't come across as very interesting, and it almost feels like J. Cole's like art album in some sense.
Hmm.
But I don't know if the art was very bright. It was kind of like dull in a lot of ways. So this felt like a slog. What was the song that you really liked though?
Neighbors.
Hmm.
Neighbors has that music video, which really hammers home the message of the song. Like you said, J. Cole's kind of playing a character on For Your Eyes Only. But in the case of Neighbors, he's actually speaking from real experience. The neighbors literally thought he was selling dope and called the cops on his house when he wasn't home. And the music video is just his security camera footage. Obviously, that speaks to something J. Cole likes to talk about, namely, race in America. And he's pretty good at that. And I think this was actually an excellent use of that because that song also is really fun to listen to. Like it sounds good. It's the closest thing there is to a banger on this album, and easily playable as a single. Um, and I think that's the most effective he is at like this not exactly light subject matter that carries most of the album, and it just so happens to be because it's based on real experience.
Yeah, that chorus. All the neighbors think I'm selling
Mhm.
dope. It's just such a catchy chorus. Yeah, I think that song probably is the best one, but I don't even know the album's kind of a dud for me.
Yeah,
Um, so
listening back to Fold and Close, I liked it more than I remembered. Like
we
it,
really clowned on that.
it's super
Mhm.
cheesy. It's super funny. But it sounds okay. Yeah, he wants to
Yeah,
full close with you. Okay.
sure, sweet.
I like
Anyways,
it more than some of the other like just dull stuff,
yeah,
like there's definitely duller shit on the album,
it's
you know.
memorable. If
Yeah.
nothing else, it's a memorable song. Um, yeah, so like, you know, 16 months later, KOD comes out. Um, and again, Cole kind of going for a concept here. He's telling stories about how drugs uh, impact people in
Yeah.
black communities growing up, especially in some of the communities that he was a part of. I think KOD is a nice return to form for Cole because while I don't think this is uh, the album with the highest highs. You just kind of talked about that. I do think there's some songs on here that really stand out, and the songs hit more than they missed for me on this. I still think he can get a little preachy at times. He can uh, kind of weigh things down with the storytelling, but overall, I thought this was a pretty good recovery. How did you feel about KOD?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I remember liking it at the time solely for that reason.
Mhm.
It's like, oh wow, this makes you forget For Your Eyes Only pretty quick. Still
Yeah.
sounds like late period Cole. It makes sense that this is the music Cole makes now, but he's
Mhm.
just making it in a better package now in terms of trying to have a deeper message and maybe ignoring the radio at this point. Totally get it, but just he refocused, I think, his approach, 2 years later, and it's not an album I revisit all that much, just because again I think there's this much more accessible songs than Born Sinner in 2014. Nevertheless, I appreciate it and definitely anticipating, you know, the off season coming off this because again, since then you've gotten Middle Child, which ended up going on the Dreamville third Dreamville album, but Middle Child I thought was actually the next step from For Your Eyes Only to KOD to the whatever's next because Middle Child is again he has a message on that song, but that song is still a radio banger. And like
Mhm.
I'm just like praying that he might have figured out how to do both at the same time, But KOD
Yeah.
he's closer to that regard with songs like ATM, right? Like
Yep.
ATM, typical like trap banger song, but it's actually about him like playing on like materialism and stuff and like rap cliches and all that. If you
Mm.
actually are listening to what he's saying, but if not, you can just listen to the song because it sounds good.
Yeah.
So
No, I
yeah,
agree. And
there's a lot like I think a lot of new jumping off points. I hope off KOD.
yeah, I agree. Even the title track, I thought the chorus around that was just really catchy and really sticks with you. And like you said, you can either bog yourself down with some of these lyrics and some of the storytelling, or you can kind of listen to these songs and just have a good time, which I think is when when J. Cole's really at his best, when he's making songs that can kind of play on both sides depending on how you
Hmm.
want to engage with the music. Um, before we kind of move on to our rankings, is there any other tracks off of KOD that you wanted to shout out?
Well, in 1985, the last one's obviously quite uh, notable. I think that song sounds good, and that's where he's like speaking to the new generation of rap. And of course, he got into like fake beef with Little Pump at one point off of that and stuff. It's actually I think most notable because it influenced YB and Corday uh, to make Old Dudes. Really, the first song anyone heard of him when it's like a really intelligent response to such preachiness from a young person. And thus we're like, huh, this Corday dude, he might be pretty good. Sure enough, he is pretty good. But yeah, I think 1985 and ATM are probably the most listenable songs off this. You mentioned KOD and Kevin's Heart as well. I think is a
Hmm.
pretty good storytelling
Yeah, decent
one from
track.
him.
We're not going to be ranking Revenge of the Dreamers 3, which is the Dreamville
Yeah,
collaboration that came out in 2019. And I think they remixed it, or yeah, they had a director's cut, is what it is,
yeah, just
the
extra
following
tracks.
year. But I think it's important that we do touch on Cole's production, company Dreamville, because I think you mentioned, or you kind of keep calling him like old phase, or like the next phase
Mm,
Cole, and he's not even 40 yet. Like this,
no,
and
36.
in the rap game, that can be when people are kind of moving into that second half of your career. Some people have that next act. Be a little bit better than others. Look at Jay Z and Eminem, for example, when we talk
Yeah.
at length about that on the page. So check it out on youtube.com/nostalgia pod. But I think what I really like about these albums is you can kind of just like click through and see the influence he has, the kind of artist that he's picking out to be on Dreamville. And I guess like just overall, what is your like opinion of him as a like curator of the next generation of rappers?
Yeah, that's funny because if you listen to Dreamville, the third Dreamville collab album, Render the Dreamers 3, there's a lot of non-Dreamville artists on that, which really wasn't the case on the first two Dreamville records. And Cole, as you expect, is probably not super involved. Like I said, middle child. That's all he needed to contribute, as far as I'm concerned, considering how great that song is. But the rest of Dreamville, I actually look at Dreamville as it's one of the, I think, most effective like rap collectives of the 2010s, for the sole fact that it's still actually a rap collective that exists and is
Mm,
active and has people making music. Look what happened to Maybach Music Group. Look how
oh,
good music is
good.
very
Yeah.
much not a collective anymore. Odd Future, of course, we know what happened there. ASAP Mob, not really the biggest thing unless we get another Cozy Tapes project. Like the rap collectives, even you can even get more granular, like HBK Gang on the Bay Area, for crying out loud. Like they don't stick around. They don't
Right.
last. But Dreamville actually has managed to last, which is kind of funny because no one else has actually really become a star off it, right? Like Earth Gang, Boz, like they're not stars, but they're all carving out careers. So I think he's one of the better, label bosses, incubators of talent as far as this goes.
Yeah, I think there's really like maybe three artists that really stand out as like great Dreamville artists that I think we're following. You mentioned Earth King. I think we like them quite a bit, but I think Ari Lennox and
Mhm.
JID Jid are
Oh, of
the two
course.
that really stand out as like that next level or that next step forward for Dreamville. But I agree. When we think about rap collectives, and I guess that we can't qualify them as simply a rap collective. The only other one that I think of that's still really active is 88 Rising. I feel
Hmm.
like we get
Yeah.
like something from them every like year at some point. We're like, oh, 88
Really
Rising's
more of
back.
a label though that happens to do
Yeah,
label group projects though. It's
exactly.
not the best definition, but
Comparison.
that's the thing.
Yeah,
You kind of have to stretch the definition at this point.
right.
So
But yeah, no, I think that's a good call on Dreamville as a collective. So you ready to rank now, or any last thoughts?
yeah, yeah, man. Let's go for it. We'll have
What's
to
your number
eventually
five?
return to this thought. We'll share our initial thoughts on where the off season falls when we do that album review.
Yeah,
Caveats of recency aside.
check that out sometime. I believe next week from when this album is dropped. So, what's your number five? I think in going through, we kind of know what the bottom two are for us, but what's your five?
Yeah, so I found this whole ranking very easy. Honestly, like it really settled in pretty quick.
Yeah,
I had my assumptions of where I would take things, and then after revisiting everything, I was pretty content with what I came up with. And I think Cold World: The Sideline Story is clearly the worst album.
yeah.
And well, we kind of went over it. Like it's just it's okay. Like there's a few highlights, like Workout, of course, but overall, it's
Mhm.
not like ambitious enough, nor does it like really even hit that well to, I think, excite any camp.
Right. Yeah, no, I completely agree. It was my number five as well, pretty easily. Um, just because it also doesn't feel like a whole album very much. In looking back, especially after listening to the whole discography, you're just kind of like, oh yeah, this really feels like label influence. So definitely my number five. Number four, I had the same as you. For Your Eyes Only. We just kind of talked about it, but just overall, I think this is where Cole can sometimes go too far into the storytelling, into trying to bring depth to the music and kind of loses sight of what makes the music fun to listen to.
Yeah, and the reason I have it above Silent Story is just because I think it has more ambition. It has better lyrics, even if most of the songs aren't that fun to be around. Besides Neighbors, it still, I think, was trying to bite off more than Sideline Story. So that's why it's four, not five.
Totally agree. We have the same list, so I'm just gonna say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, KOD, I think pretty easily the third best
Yep.
album. Again, a return to form for Cole, but still, I think sometimes gets a little bogged down with some of the issues with For Your Eyes Only. Tracks can be a little too deep in terms of what he's trying to say, or maybe a little too much. But definitely a much more fun listen than For Your Eyes Only.
Yep. Definitely.
Then you have Born Sinner and 2014 Forest Hills as your two and one. Tell me why Born Sinner's number two for you.
Yeah, that's the thing. I was like, because I kind of settled in on this, and like I was thinking what everyone says on a lot of people say online. It's like, is Born Sinner the best one? And I listened, and I was like, I like a lot of these songs, but I don't like him as much as I like the 2014 songs. I'm sorry.
Mhm.
Can't do it.
Yeah.
Can't do it. I think Born Center is a really strong album.
Yep.
Like we said, there's a lot of moments on it. It actually has, I think, worthwhile bonus tracks
Mhm.
on top as well. And again, we think of it fondly for Cole demonstrating a huge leap off a disappointing debut album. But yet, it's the next album, 2014, where he really ascends once again commercially, but also I think, you know, just these are just better songs, I think, especially like the
Yeah.
highlights of 2014 versus the highlights of Born Sinner. I'm just going to take the 2014 songs. Those songs hit more and he performs more of them live still, which kind of, I think, lends itself to popular opinion. People like that album just a little bit more.
Yeah, when you get into these lists and you have to kind of pick and choose, you start to really like break it down to like, well, what is it that really makes this album so much better? And I think for me, when I think about J. Cole, especially like the J. Cole as the artist that we know now, who he is really starts to shine through on Forest Hills. And not only I think are the highs of that album a little bit higher than the ones of Born Sinner, but the album as a whole is just more uh it's just more of a cohesive project. It has a vision, one clear vision, and I think it executes it almost flawlessly. I definitely think Born Sinner is probably the best mix of like commercial pop sound that Cole found. Kind of mixing with his style, but when I go through this record, especially with the deluxe edition that's on Spotify and on streaming. uh, There's a lot of tracks on here, and when there's a lot of tracks, some are going to be good, and some are just going to be like, okay, that's fine. And I think that's kind of why Forest Hills is number one for me. Is I feel like other than maybe one or two tracks, they're all just really, really great. So, um, yeah, this is one of the easier rankings we've had. I'd say, but it was nice to go back and listen through the whole discography. J Cole's a good artist.
Yeah, definitely.
Hot
And
take.
but yeah, but potential for the off season and the fall off to come. Very exciting, just because he hasn't discussed any interest in retiring at this time. He just doesn't really talk about it, and he
Mhm.
reiterated that stance recently. So that's exciting. Because again, he's 36. So if he was to slow down and just enter a new stage of his career, no one, I guess, would be surprised given the history of rap music. But it seems like he's still just as popular as and also as energized as ever, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I think given what we heard with Middle Child and the one or two tracks that he's already released off of
Mhm.
the off season, I think we're at least going to be seeing an album that will fall probably somewhere. If you're looking at Dave's screen, at least at the level of KOD, if
Yeah,
not, kind
you'd
of
have
between
to hope,
KOD and Born Sinner. So I'm
right?
pretty optimistic for this.
Yeah,
So
exciting. So check in next week for that album review at youtube.com/nostalgia pod. Don't miss out, and more rankings to come. So subscribe.
hit that subscribe button. We'll catch you next week.